I think it's better to be loud than not loud, but...
You told me last time that mine was too loud, but then you always say I speak too loud.
Okay, and keep an eye on your batteries.
Yes.
I mean, of the recorder, not your personal ones, because I think that ship's already sailed. Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to Tokyo Jazz Joints Podcast, episode 49. We are inching towards the half century, James. In many ways, really, I suppose, actually, now I come to think of it.
I was thinking that we were closer than even the podcast was to a half century. At least I am.
Well, you might be, mate.
I'm coming on 49 around the corner in a couple weeks. So, maybe we could save the next podcast until next year and we can match them up. There'd be some nice symmetry there. How the hell are you, man? It's been too long. Why have we been delayed? What's going on?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say we've been delayed so much as it's very strategically planned recording, but obviously,
yes, of course.
One of the reasons, James, which, we cannot start without mentioning, is the Kickstarter. And the last episode we recorded, if I'm not mistaken, was actually to officially launch the Kickstarter. And let me just tell you how that day went, because obviously we recorded it in advance. I put the podcast out as normal on this Sunday morning, a little bit earlier. I actually didn't mention it on social media, I think, till the following day. So I'm reliably told that is known as a soft launch, James, which I'm sure you're familiar with.
I'm gonna refrain from commenting on soft launches there, but yes.
Yeah, and so obviously we put the campaign up, launched it or announced it through the podcast, and obviously the nature of podcast being a podcast, maybe some people it's coming directly into their feeds, other people maybe get to it later in the week, or they have a routine when they listen to it. So you wouldn't necessarily expect an immediate response, right? But anyway, a couple of kind souls started our Kickstarter campaign. One of my oldest friends, Michael Stady, shout out to him. He was the very first pledger. And then, of course, as you do with these things, you go into a slight tailspin because you're like, no one's pledging. Had a shower, came back, couple of pledges. And really, James, from there on in, it was just a complete, I say roller coaster, but really there weren't any ups and downs. It's like we just kept going up and up and up. And what? We finished, if you're not already familiar, we finished, thanks to the generosity of people listening to the podcast and other people that can't bear to listen to us on a weekly basis, but do support the project. We finished our campaign with 200% funding. So we were double what our original target had been, which I'd have to say probably, without any exaggeration, completely just blew us away, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we had a little bit of, to be expected anxiety or nervousness that, maybe we've overestimated the people who love us and send us all these great messages. And when it comes to maybe putting up some financial support behind those kind messages, we weren't really sure. And I think the thing that amazed me the most, Philip, it wasn't even the 200%. It was the fact that it was so many people that we don't know personally. So there's a lot of people out there who've been listening to the podcast, who've seen the website, who've seen one of the various exhibitions that have been held around the world, and all the great PR that's happened too, all the magazines we've been in, the blogs, etc. And that is, I think, what for me really showed how much interest there is in this world that we're documenting, and that we've done, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but that we've done a really good job communicating it, because in addition to all of the great financial support, I was equally pleased with all the great verbal support, all the people saying that they couldn't wait, that they've been following us, that they were so happy we were finally going to get this done, and that they want to see what comes next in the next few years. And I know for me that gave, a real kick in the behind to be like, okay, this is the next great stage. This is something we've wanted to do for years now. But it's not the final stage. It's just one step on a longer journey. We're going to keep going. We'll get into that a little bit later in the program. But it was the support, it was the verbal support, and 200%, man. I mean, that's way more than even I expected.
Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. I mean, if you saw the Instagram live, you can still get that there if you're really desperate for some more content, which I suspect most people aren't. But it's on our Instagram. But we did just, I think on Christmas Eve, it was in both countries, Japan and Ireland. We timed it in such a way that we could kind of get the most people. And, just to celebrate, because incredibly, I think in less than 6 days, we'd hit 100% of our funding. And it just continued. And also, for me, it just felt so long because obviously managing the Kickstarter at the back end, and, we'd taken some advice to put in an extra few days to account for the holidays. And by the end of it, you thought, this is never going to finish because it just seemed so long away from hitting our initial funding target to the end of it. But like to double what we were looking for was really incredible. And a lot of people have asked me since, well, what are you going to do with the extra money? And it's probably worth being, clear that when you do a Kickstarter campaign, obviously a large percentage, probably more than 25%, I would say, is actually postage, right? So anyone who pledged will know when you pledge, you also pledge for the postage. So that money's coming in and going straight out again on postage, But what it also means that we can do is we were able to cover some of these additional costs that maybe not obvious when it comes to publishing things. So, for example, having the book shipped from Germany, obviously, if you're moving anything like that in that quantity to any country, you're going to come into either, VAT charges or import taxes and things like that. So there's those kind of additional costs. And then what it also will allow us to do is just to, maybe add a couple of little embellishments to the book that perhaps wouldn't previously have been possible. And, we had 650 books initially from the first print run, which I suspect might be slightly bigger than was originally planned from the publisher. But, we sold 600 of those books. So there's about 50 of those books still knocking about. I'm sure probably we'll keep a few copies for ourselves and so on. But, there will be more copies of that book available. So, and then, just we're hoping if there's any, anything left over and change, we're hoping obviously to put that back into the project. We're not heading off to Bahamas. We're going to throw that into a couple of launches. We're hoping to do one in Belfast.
We're not. I thought we went.
Oh yeah,
Philip. No, wasn't it James,
Brazil? I was very clear. Do not book tickets to Brazil.
It was
that not? Did you not?
The Jazz Kisaten in Rio. I thought that was, we were gonna, expand. Oh, okay. My bad. My mistake. No,
I thought you'd cashed your pension in for that one, but
as you said rightly, there's a lot of additional costs, and I mean, I think many of our listeners, because this is a very international program, will be aware of that. That shipping costs, distribution costs have just skyrocketed in the last few years for a number of unfortunate world reasons.
Crazy.
So
actually, on that point, just sorry to interrupt, but actually, just as an anecdote to illustrate that, talking with the publisher in particular, I mean, life's in the timing, right? I have this sense that I don't always have the best timing, but it's probably the most expensive time ever to publish a book. And he was telling me that for publishers in particular, like when in photo book publishing, when they're ordering paper, incredibly, like when you order the paper, it could be one price, but actually you don't pay that price when you order. You pay the price of the paper when it arrives. So, it's like going out saying, well, like, I want this car and it's like 20 grand. And when you get to the garage, they say, well, actually, no, sorry, costs have gone up. It's now 25 grand. So, it's kind of like, it's unthinkable really now. The Kerr, the publisher, have been absolutely fantastic, and it's been a very collaborative project. I've got a meeting on Tuesday with them. It's the first meeting with the designers, so we're going to look at some ideas of what's possible. There's some talk of possibly increasing the number of images in the book, or increasing the number of pages, or even slightly increasing the size of the book and stuff as well. So these are all like really, really positive things. But I think also, like you mentioned, international audience, what's incredible, and I'm going to put a little graphic together for this because I'm such a nerd, but like, it's amazing to see like from, China, Singapore, obviously Japan, America, Canada, places like Mexico, Peru, all manner of countries in Europe as well, Turkey. Like, it's just been incredible, like to see that not only the power of social media and like the connection that you can make through the online world, but just like the extent of the audience, and also not just for our project, but obviously the interest in like jazz Kisa culture. So, maximum respect to all the people who pledged.
That's something that we, again, we've heard from, not just people that we know personally or people that we've known through online things over the years of doing the project, but just random people who've just been like, oh, I went to Japan once. I was able to go to a couple jazz Kisaten, and it's one of the best things I've ever done. And, there's one little joint in my hometown that's a little bit similar. Come and visit us here. And you just kind of feel like, wow, Who would have thought that, this rather obscure obsession of ours to visit dusty, tiny hole in the wall places that play old jazz records would connect us to such a vast audience. I mean, I'm so happy about it because, yeah, I mean, we joke around and say that it's a little bit of a, as you would say in the Japanese English, we're maniacs for this stuff, but there's a lot of people out there interested. And yeah, never underestimate the real, I don't know, this is kind of the silly buzzword they use these days here in Japan. It doesn't mean what they think it means, but cool Japan. Some of our listeners will know that was a very failed attempt by the government here to sort of project Japan as being, hip and trendy for new tourists. And what they didn't realize was they didn't need to do that because, first of all, if it comes from the government, it's by definition not cool. And secondly, there's already this massive desire and curiosity about all things Japanese. And, we're seeing that now that the borders have opened since November. I've noticed just the other day, I was in the center of Tokyo and what 6 months ago would have been just, a dead zone, was swarming with international tourists. So people have come back and a lot of those are people who've contacted us and, want to go on a little tour. We'll get into a little bit more of that part later too. It's just been, it's so much more of a positive experience. Cause I remember, Philip, when you pitched me an idea, I'd never used a Kickstarter or crowdfunding or any of these things. And I was a little bit skeptical about it. It's turned out to be, far surpassed what I expected.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I have to say, shout out to Kickstarter who, throughout the process have been really supportive. I had a couple of people I was contacting in Kickstarter, they were really encouraging, gave some really good advice before we set up the campaign. We got onto a couple of the Kickstarter newsletters. There was one night I was going to bed and there was suddenly this like rush of pledges mostly from America. And I was like, something's happening. Like there's something has gone up somewhere. And it turned out it was this Kickstarter letter on their page. So, it's been like an amazing experience. The payments and things were processed very quickly. Amazingly, James, out of like 601 backers, we only dropped 5 as well, which I thought was like incredible. We just Kickstarter couldn't contact those people to get their payment details. So if you are one of those 5 people and you're wondering where your book is or why you haven't heard, do get in touch with us through the Kickstarter platform and we can try and figure something out. But it's just been incredible. And still we're getting messages, I've had few messages recently, can we still get the book? And there's still a few left at this certain pledge level. Is it possible to buy them? And people seem to be really interested. And again, also people still saying to me I've just come across the podcast. Can't believe I haven't found it before and stuff like that. So it's really nice to see as you said, and I think it says this in the little piece of text that I wrote for the book, that this is not the end. The book is just another milestone in this project because, the point of the project was always a race against time to try and capture these places, to visit these places before they go, and that's not going to change, and that hasn't changed. And as we know, the more the interest increases globally and all the rest of it, the more ultimately that the number of these places is going to decrease in Japan. Yes, there are new places opening, but it's never going to be the heyday of what it was. So this is just a milestone. Who knows, James? Could be more Tokyo Jazz joints, could be more Tokyo Jazz joints. Fingers crossed. We just don't know, but plan is to get the book out. And just on that note, we have a sort of tentative publication date, assuming nothing else goes wrong and things are going pretty smoothly at the moment, famous last words, is the first week of June. So hopefully that'll be the publication date. And then from that point on, it'll be a case of once I have the books, starting to send them out to all the people who are listening that pledged. So, keep an eye on the socials, keep an eye on the Kickstarter updates. And fingers crossed by the end of July, certainly into August, you're going to have that Tokyo Jazz Joints book in your hand. And what a glorious thing it is to be able to say that, James.
But as you mentioned, in the meantime, we still have a lot of work to do, and work that I have been doing since you have still not visited here. That's what's known in the business, Philip, as a segue. It's sort of a transition to a new topic that you do when you're a professional podcaster like myself.
Oh, you're going for that professional status, right? Well, actually, I think I'm gonna raise your segue, James, because obviously one of the images that became completely in my mind is now just intricately linked to the book is the one from Pithecanthropus erectus, right? Which, just seems to like, and like, I know we were sort of hemming in hand at first and was like, well, what should we use for the cover? And da-da-da. And like, when, even I was like, was that the right one? And it's just funny how like quickly, maybe it's just from seeing it so much that image just becomes in your mind. It's like, oh, that's the cover of the book. Like, it's just like a no-brainer, right? Yeah. But obviously, Pithecanthropus erectus, classic Charles Mingus album. And we thought it might be a nice way just to like, progress on from talking about the book is obviously Mingus, right? Because I think recently you had your own kind of like Mingus epiphany. Is that right?
I certainly did. As our fans and regular listeners will know, I try to maybe every other month or so, I'll take a weekend and I'll go somewhere random around the country to keep adding to my tally of jazz spots visited. So, we talked on the last podcast how I had gone down to Nagasaki, and then also to Sapporo. But just a few weeks ago, I went up north to the Tohoku region and was able to spend a good 3 days up there in rather extreme cold. A little bit of a bad timing to go in January, my mistake. But yes, the first stop was the absolutely remarkable Mingus. That is located just, 3 minutes walk from Fukushima Station. And Fukushima City is sort of the first major city to enter the Tohoku region. Tohoku in Japanese means northeast. And even though it might not sound so far away from an American perspective, it's pretty far when you take the bullet train. I mean, if you go all the way to the top to Aomori, that's a good 800 kilometers, 5 hours on the bullet train. But the first city that you'll get to when you leave Tokyo, the first major city, is Fukushima. So I hopped up there. It was about 90 minutes, ran from the station and went into Mingus, which was, I believe, Philip, was the last place that you visited on your trip before you went back 5 years ago. Is that correct?
Almost. I mean, Fukushima is interesting, right? I think we touched on this before, but obviously, to paraphrase Gil Scott-Heron, came into some international kind of fame when, for the wrong reasons, really, right? Because it was the site of one of the nuclear power plant that was very badly affected by the tsunami back in 2011. So it suddenly was projected onto the international stage, and like I remember actually, and during that time, like volunteering, I remember randomly being with a guy. I think he was a Kiwi, and we were like going to get a van from somewhere or something. But I remember actually driving through Fukushima, and it was strange because like again, you're so trained by kind of apocalyptic films and all these kind of things to be like to imagine this certain thing. And of course, it was very quiet, but it was just fairly normal. Now, there were obviously no-go zones and so on, which we weren't going through, but like it just became so, even like going up in 2018, it wasn't the last place I visited, but it was, I think, coming back down from somewhere, I went past it. And, it was one of those things where like, you kind of think, God, this place, like what has this place been through, but then of course, you get to the station and you turn up at this place, and the sign, I think we mentioned the sign before, the sign has this very interesting tagline, right? It's outside and it says Mingus, days of wine, roses and jazz, which I just think is, and then of course this is set to a backdrop of 1,000 electrical wires all like tied together with bits of string, right?
And it's also just interesting because it's such a soft, dainty turn of phrase there, which is just not what you would use to describe Charles Mingus's music nor personality.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it
was kind of, that was a strange dichotomy. But it's funny, because when I was sitting and talking with the owner, and it was really amazing because, like I think I mentioned when we talked about my trip to Nagasaki on the last episode, sometimes these places that have been the site of, as you said, apocalyptic or tragic events, outsiders tend to immediately identify that location with that event. And it's something that the locals really, I wouldn't say they resented, but in Japan, at least, they're quite disappointed. It was really obvious from our conversation that he didn't want people to avoid coming to Fukushima Prefecture or the city, or to, of course, to his bar, because of some, fear that there's still some sort of contamination or they're going to get ill or whatever. Life has gone on very well. Obviously, other events have affected business there, and that was one thing I noticed, because when you had went and you had taken pictures, and they are up on the Mingus section of TokyoJazzJoints.com. It's a two-floored place. The third floor being a sort of a bar area, and the second floor being a sort of a lounge with live music. Very large by Tokyo standards. I mean, you could get 75 to 100 people in there probably if they were standing. But currently, unfortunately, due to COVID, he's sort of shut the third floor bar. And he just has people come in to drink in this more spacious second floor lounge. That makes sense with the whole distancing.
Yeah, but it's weird, right? Because I think we had a very sort of yin and yang experience of Mingus, right? Because obviously I was in the third floor in actual fact, and he just opened. I think he was cooking up some food, and only through chatting with him, he was like, "Oh, you must come downstairs." So I spent my time in the third floor, and he took me to the second floor. Now I don't know, did he even take you up to the third floor?
No, he didn't. I mean, we were talking about it, but we were sitting and talking so long. And by the time I thought about, going up there, I had to just sort of like excuse myself because I had to race back to get my train because I was heading up to Sendai. But he had said that it was kind of, anyway, it wasn't open at all. Like he just kind of like, he hadn't cleaned it. There was just boxes and stuff. So there wasn't really much to, I mean, he would have taken me, but there wasn't really probably much to see. The focus was more on the second floor, sort of large room. But he was still doing some live events. He said that customers were still coming by. And one of the most interesting things about Mingus was, I've never seen this before, Philip, and we've been to, I mean, I just passed my 275th jazz joint that I visited. It's the first place I've ever seen that actually, come on, had to slip that in somehow. The first place I've ever seen that has a workstation, and he actually has an audio little workstation with a workbench and all these little parts and components and tools. And what he does is he fixes audio equipment, he fixes speakers, turntables, and he does that for people that he knows of, audiophile friends of his, but he also does it for a lot of young people. He told me a lot of college students who are just getting into vinyl. We know that there's a big vinyl boom worldwide right now, so people of that age, even teenagers, are starting to buy records or buying used turntables, don't really know how to fix them, don't really know how to use them properly. So they'll bring it to him, and he'll like fix up an old used turntable to make it usable for them. And I was blown away by this guy. I was like, who taught you how to do this? Did you study? He's like, no. When I was a kid, he literally said when he was in high school, it was really expensive to buy this audio equipment in Japan. We've heard that many times. That's a whole part of the Kisaten culture, right? Is that you could listen on these good systems that you couldn't afford. So he decided that, he'd probably never be able to really afford an expensive one. So he decided to experiment and putting together piece by piece, his entire audio system. So over the years, he taught himself everything that he needed to know. And remember, this is way pre YouTube tutorials,
pre-internet.
This is all just by trial and error, and then all of the Japanese audio magazines. So I could tell that he was, he was telling me this very casually. He wasn't saying it with a sense of pride, but I was like immediately like, wow, this dude is really, really special. So that we had a great, I would say I only had about maybe 50 minutes, a little bit less than an hour to chat with him. But, he told me a lot about, the music scene there, that there's some people who do live locally, but it's not too far for Tokyo musicians to come up and play live gigs. So he's hoping that as COVID weakens, he can sort of get events going a little bit more frequently.
Yeah, because I think he talked about like the high school kids as well. I think in like the local university, like I think at the time he said they came like one night a week and they did like, jam sessions and things like that. Because he was actually cooking, I think he was cooking up curry, but it was for that because I think he was expecting people like later in the evening to come. It was on that night. Now I know you're a bit weird about the food, but like, and I'm pretty sure you didn't have you didn't have the curry, right?
I thankfully it came out very close to when I had to leave because
it was so good
about not eating.
It was so good though. Seriously, like I mean, okay, we've had some ropey stuff, right? We've had some ropey stuff, but in this place, I was like, it was like a proper meal. It was like really nice, really spicy, really tasty. But like I sat at the counter with him just looking at some of the photos. I mean, you can find them on the Mingus page on the website, but it's kind of interesting because the sort of predominant color seems to be like a kind of red, right? And interestingly, in the third floor, He's got this what almost looks like a fireplace down at one end, and inside that fireplace, there is a picture of Miles, and it's lit in this kind of red. Again, this kind of pseudo-religious kind of shrine way, and then these huge, big, like leather sofas. So, like, it's probably one of the more homely, like comfortable jazz keys. And then there's all sorts of weird, there's, things like drum skins and vinyl and all the things you would expect. But I noticed in one of them, there's these kind of, I know our track record of fishing things is not great, but they look to me like they're like big glass, they look like glass footballs inside a net, which I presume is some kind of like fishing device, right? But I don't know why.
Okay, I know from the picture because I didn't go up to the third floor. I had no idea what those were, not a clue. I don't think that was fishing because Fukushima City is not near the ocean, so
no. And you wouldn't be using glass, right?
Yeah.
If anyone knows, drop us a line. But I've just horribly embarrassed ourselves there once again with our knowledge of the world.
It's funny you mentioned that. No, because I did notice that, but I was more taken just with the murals because he didn't do them. He said that they've been done by various people. You did take a couple pictures of them in the stairwell. There's a really
I took more than a couple, yeah.
Cool one of Joe Zawinul and another one, of course, Mingus himself. And, a lot of, I think that it is amazing. Every time that you do get out of the Tokyo metro area or the Osaka, metro area, you realize that the joints are at least 2 to 3 times bigger than the ones that we see here. And so spatially, you're kind of immediately, like you said, you do get a little bit more of a homey feel. You don't feel quite so cramped. And then you also get this like insane amount of clutter, even more than Tokyo. So you do have all these random things lying around, including, so he's got his workstation, that Miles Davis fireplace, which is just completely inexplicable because you're heading up to Tohoku. It's freezing cold. Why not make the fireplace actually work? So I don't know what that's about.
Fair point. I hadn't thought of that.
And then, spread around all around the live spot too, you do have these little things with like, suddenly you'll see like a little picture of like Dexter Gordon, like behind the piano. And then you'll see another sort of thing that says Mingus, or you'll see like a little magazine, like framed behind a corner, which was like a profile of the shop, So you have to spend a lot more time wandering around to see everything in there. Even the stairwell is great. You got a great picture.
Well, yeah, I think we really undersold because we sort of jumped straight in. The second floor place where you were is, also kind of in itself, like it again has this huge picture of Miles at one end, but again, it's suddenly like, all like red velvet seating and like, huge amounts of equipment and like what looks like a grand piano as well. But the stairwell, I think probably is one of the kind of the most remarkable things about this place I found. We've seen these kind of like paintings, and we know that some of the owners, would illustrate and like, or photograph and, their heroes and things like, but I think it's all about jazz, isn't it? It says, and then like, the stairwell is literally covered with, there's Charlie Parker, there's Coltrane, there's
McCoy
Miles,
Tyner,
there's Count Basie, McCoy Tyner, Joe Zawinul, like it's just unreal, right? And it goes right up the staircase, and they look like they've been there for like 30, 40 years, but again, like so vibrant, and they still, and I don't think we've seen anything like that in any other place that we've been in terms of like just the scale and sort of quality as well, because they look, they're brilliant, right? They're really brilliant. Like, because pictures.
We've seen sometimes, in some kisaten, some fan has painted a portrait of their favorite musician. You're kind of like, who's that again? Oh, it's Miles Davis.
Remind me. Yeah.
I couldn't quite tell, but these are all absolutely spot on, perfect. So yeah, Mingus is. I was just like, I was absolutely kicking myself that it took me 5 years to get there, because there's just really no excuse. It's pretty close once you hop on the Shinkansen. But so I had told the guy that I was I'm going to come back soon and spend a proper evening there. I promised to try the spicy curry next time. But Philip,
believe it when I see it.
Because on my trip, the next, so I headed up to Sendai. And, Sendai, I went to visit our very good old friend, the Buddha of Sendai, at the Count. Do you remember him? The Count,
of course.
And believe me, he was as Buddha-like as always. He gives you the menu. He brings you your drink, and he goes back to sit behind the counter, smoking a cigarette with his eyes closed, listening to the record. And
the man's enlightened. What do you want? He's enlightened. What do you want?
He's there for like 10 hours a day. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. But I had a great hour there. And interestingly, all the customers there were very young, which I thought was really cool. We're seeing more and more young people go to the
Brilliant.
tent. So, but the next morning, I went a little bit outside of Sendai to a place that, I mean, visually, it would have to be the complete opposite of a place like Mingus. It is a brand new joint. It opened just in the beginning of December, and it's called Paragonian. And the owner, very nice dude named Hiroshi. Hiroshi-san is actually retired from the wine business. So he spent many decades as an importer and exporter of high-quality wines. And he ended up opening this new sort of jazz kissa called Paragonian, almost kind of by chance, because do you remember the old one way up in Miyagi Prefecture called the Half Note, which I think was one of the oldest Tohoku ones. Now, I never got to go there, unfortunately. But so the Half Note owner was sick, and he was basically closing the joint and going to sell a lot of his records. So this dude, Hiroshi, who had just retired, he's 70 years old, a friend of his was like, hey, let's go up and buy some of his records, you know? So they go up there, and Hiroshi sees that the owner of Half Note actually has a Paragon speaker system. Now, you and I are not audio people, Philip, but we've heard of Paragon systems before because they're so famous. There were only less than 1,000 made over a 30-year period up until the early 80s. And then the line stopped. So they're very, very rare. There's less than 50 Paragon speaker systems in all of Japan. So the people who have them are not getting rid of them. But this...
Yeah, and I think like if I'm not mistaken, because I remember reading something about this, maybe in relation to the book and Paragon or something, but I think, and I'm happy to be corrected, but I'm pretty sure the kind of minimum going rate for one now is about $30,000, right? I think.
My understanding would be that it's going to be even a little higher than that. Yeah, because
really? Okay.
Because they're just so in demand. So
happy for James to be corrected, and if anyone knows the real answer.
So this guy Hiroshi told me that they negotiated. Of course, this is proper Japanese conversation. He didn't tell me how much he paid for it, and I wasn't going to ask him. But then he had a problem because for those of you who have not seen a Paragon speaker system, I mean, it's as big as a piano. So he had to get it from the Half Note to his new shop that he was currently constructing. Eventually, he got it moved. He called some piano movers. They got it set up. And so he has opened his own shop called the Paragonian. It's a brand new jazz kisaten / luxury wine shop. Again, not one that we've seen before. Philip, you are a wine drinker, so I think you would appreciate it more than me. But it's an absolutely gorgeous place. He had the architects make it in a sort of a cabin. It's got a very, very high triangular ceiling, and it's got a 2-foot concrete floor to absorb the sound, so he can really, really blast the music out with this Paragon system. And then he's also got a little store on the side that he was still getting ready to sell all the import wine that he brings. So he's going to have like wine events / live jazz / gallery, and during the daytime it's coffee and tea time. It was such an impressive structure, and he was such a nice guy. So I really hope that he can get the customers to come in. It's not too far from Sendai, so people will come for the wine. I'm sure of that, even if they don't come for the jazz.
Yeah, amazing. It's kind of interesting though, just isn't it? Like how we often talk about like adapting and how like even historically some of the places had to adapt a little bit with like menus and like even the type of music they played, like particularly in the 70s when fusion came in and all these kind of things. But like, isn't it interesting and we've talked more recently about even things like edible food and like Wi-Fi and like encouraging female customers, but isn't it interesting to kind of like see this sort of hybrid where like you're preserving the love and the heritage that exists, but also like adapting it to a modern environment? Because ultimately I suppose that's the way that the culture may not in its purest form survive, but like by kind of developing this more modern approach or this hybrid approach, like it will actually hopefully last for much longer, right?
Oh, definitely. And also just as a pure business model, it makes sense to, there's going to be people like us or even more audio geek types who would travel all the way there just to see the Paragon sound system.
Sure, yeah.
But I think you'll get a lot more customers who want to just like buy some nice wine and listen to jazz and couldn't give a crap about the speakers, But if you want to see some pictures you can see some of them up on my Instagram, but you should go over to his page. It's just Paragonian_jazz. And it's really cool. In his bio, he just puts grape.sounds, which I think is a beautiful description. The rest is in Japanese. And you can see a lot of pictures of his really, really cool structure. He's even got pictures of when it was being built. I think he was sort of documenting it online. So Hiroshi-san, thank you for being so welcoming. He does speak really good English too because of his experience.
And thank you also for pledging to the campaign as well, because he did pledge to the Kickstarter campaign. I know he was back and forth a little bit with us about how to do it, but we got there in the end. So as well, yes. It'll be really nice to eventually get to visit there as well. Again, if you're interested in the Paragon system, I know certainly if you look on TokyoJazzTunes.com on Nancy, there's Nancy, which is in the regions section, and also Paragon, of course, that you and I visited, James, which had, was again named after the sound system, but it had this beautiful system, sort of installed quite high up with like loads of memorabilia and different stuff around it as well. So it is just like the most beautiful thing to look at, right? I mean, it's just also Jamaica, of course, have one as well, don't they?
Oh yes. Of course, I think of the so-called around 50 that are in Japan. I think about 15 of them at least are in some of the kisaten and bars, including non-jazz places too, places we haven't been to yet. But that struck me when somebody told me that. I was a little skeptical because that would mean that there's 30 people who have one in their home. I mean, again, if you've seen one of these things, it's going to be very, very difficult to have unless you've got a really big country house. So
some people have big houses, James. Come on. We know that. There's plenty of people in Tokyo with big houses. Come on.
They don't spend all their money traveling around the country to visit jazz kisaten. That's why.
Exactly. That's why they've got money.
A nicer house. But anyway, definitely Paragonian is a nice new addition, and we really wish him well and hope that people can visit, and go up there and check it out. It's only about a 20-minute ride from Sendai Station. So, Sendai, the biggest city in the Tohoku region. So it's pretty easy to get to. And again, he does speak English, so that's a real advantage for our international listeners. But Philip, I think let's get into a little more professional podcasting jargon. We've buried the lead of this segment. You know why?
Have we?
Because the absolute peak and one of the I always speak in hyperbole, but this time I'm being honest. One of the 10 best places I've visited in Japan. No doubt.
Big statement alert. We should have had a trigger warning there for a big statement. I mean, that is
you've got to edit in some jingles.
Remind me, how many was it? 275 you've been to? Was it?
270.
Yeah.
270.
Oh yeah, okay. And it's the top 10. You're saying it's the top 10, yeah? You're going to have to go back and revise that episode that we did of our top jazz keys.
You're right. I forgot about that one.
Go on then.
Okay, so as you remember, because you have traveled a lot around the Tohoku area, things are spread out. It's cold. There are not a lot of trains or buses. They're very infrequent, especially on the weekend when I was there. But I decided to take the plunge. I took a 2-hour bus ride through very snowy hills to get to a town, and this is a very generous description by calling it a town, okay, of Tome in Miyagi Prefecture. And from Tome, there's not even a bus station. The bus lets you out in front of one of those, like, what do they call it in English? Philip, you remember, Kumin Center. They built this shit all around the country.
Like a sort of civic center, community center.
Yeah, that nobody goes to. It's just, again, more pork barrel politics, as to little deep cut there for our loyal listeners, that they build these things all around the country because they get government money, but there's not enough people to actually have any events there. So anyway, the bus drops you off there, and then you got to walk about 15 to 20 minutes through a sort of almost a highway full of just like chain ramen shops and McDonald's and supermarkets. And finally you get to a side street, and there's a little blue house, and on the right side is a door into a butcher shop, and on the left is a little pathway with a sign that says Elvin. And that is the famous Elven Jazz Kissaten that I've been hearing about for years and years and years, and finally got to. Not a lot of people I know have been there because it is so far away, but went in, and Philip, I'm not joking, we've had some strange experiences when we go into Kissaten sometimes. This was one of the strangest. I was with a friend, and we walked in, and there was a record playing, but there was nobody there. And we thought, okay, maybe he's in the back, he's in the kitchen or whatever. Nobody was there for like 20 minutes. The record finished, okay, and the needle was popping, and there was no one there. And I was.
That's a moral dilemma, isn't it? That's a moral dilemma. It's like, do I turn this over? Do I touch this? I mean, wow.
Well,
it's terrifying.
Having known that a lot of these Kissaten places are run by really older people, I was kind of worried, to be honest. I poked my head behind into the little kitchen to see, like, perhaps if the guy was there and he was sick or something. But then I said, okay, look, let me go to the little shop that seems to be connected, not knowing if it was the same owner or not. And I walk in, and it's the guy's wife. She gives me a big smile. She's like, "Oh, are you here for the jazz Kissaten?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." She's like, "Oh, let me call my husband. He's here doing something with the meat."
Amazing.
So she calls him, and he comes out, and he's got a huge smile. And he takes me back around into the place, and we have a cup of coffee, and we start talking. And man, absolutely beautiful spot. Again, it's deep in the country, so it's a really, really big, high-ceilinged sort of, that real sort of like rustic cabin feeling, you know? It's even got a bit of a loft space at top. And interestingly, not only did he come up with a lot of gossip about the Jazz Kissaten world, which we can get into later, but you remember our dear friend Swifty-san from Basie, of course, right? And how he's sort of the fulcrum of the north part of Japan, Japanese scene, or maybe one of the most famous Jazz Kissaten in all of Japan. Well, our man at Elven basically did the audio for all of the events at Basie over the years. You remember you took a lot of pictures of the gigs. I think he still had them up at Basie, right? The gigs that were in the shop with like McCoy and Elvin and all those guys, right?
Yeah, I wonder, is that the one that always sticks in my mind is the Elvin Jones Jazz Machine, right? So I wonder, so is that where the inspiration for the name came from then, or?
Not only direct inspiration, because in the Elvin Cafe, and you can see a couple of these pictures that I took up on my Instagram feed. There are pictures of our man with Elvin Jones in the shop, with him at Basie, and a signed picture that says, peace and love, Elvin Jones. So it's, hanging up on the wall. So he knew him because he was running. So basically, he was running all of the audio equipment and at Basie, and Basie was doing gigs back in those days, probably like all the time, right? So, and it's only a 45-minute drive from Ichinoseki to Tomei City, where he lives. So he decided to open his own place. And being an audio guy, again, he built his entire audio system by himself. And basically was just like, well, I made this space for me. Nobody comes here, and I don't expect anyone to come, but I'm really happy you're here. And I was like, oh, come on, I'm sure you've had your regular customers. He's like, oh, yeah, I have some people come in, regulars now and then, but they're all old like me. And he started laughing. He was one of those kind of jovial dudes that laughs after everything that he tells you. You know what I mean? So he was an absolute delight. A little bit of a thick Tohoku accent, so I actually recorded our conversation so I could go back later because there were parts that I did miss. But Elvin is just such, again, it's one of those sort of places that it is identifiable as a jazz Kissaten. It shares all the things that we love about Kissaten throughout all of Japan. But it's also one of those ones that's very clearly of its place. It's clearly not a Kyushu place. It's definitely a Tohoku place. It's got the gas stove, it's got the wood, it's got the high cabined walls, the wooden ceiling with the beams. So you really feel like you are, oh yes, this is like the north of Japan. And just bonus points for that. I mean, again, the first jazz butcher that we've met. How cool is that? So we met a jazz sommelier and we met a jazz butcher on the same trip. So absolutely a top-notch place. You must go there as soon as you get your butt back here.
Well, I mean, the true professional, because that brings us to the end of the section where I live vicariously through your life, which something I never thought I'd be saying. But also to the exciting news, at least for me, James, and hopefully a little bit for you as well, is that finally, I've managed to book my tickets to Japan. So I'm going to be out in April, a bit shorter, unfortunately, due to the absolutely astonishingly expensive price of flights at the minute to Japan from Europe. But either way, I'm coming out on the first week of April. So I'm going to be there for about 14 days. I think I've got full 14 days, which I suspect, and I got a little bit of funding through university and Japanese foundation. So hopefully, I'm going to be hitting the ground running when I see you on the 9th. And then it's just going to be some hardcore traveling, photographing around the country. And, might even get up to that magical 200 mark, who knows? But like either way, I just cannot believe that it's been 5 years, like it's going to be 5 years by the time, or nearly 5 years by the time I come back in April, which, had you told me before all this COVID drama, I would not have believed, because I just always imagined I'd be back, every year and a half. As we know, the world had different plans, but hey.
But it's funny in a way. I mean, yeah, obviously we would give anything to not have COVID had happened, but in some senses we wouldn't have been doing the podcast. Who knows?
Very true. Very true.
Might not have even had the book come through, because you might not have been, so focused on that. You would have been focused on just coming back. So making the best of it. But listen, I have got a full itinerary ready for you. All of the hits, Philip. We're going to have bathroom stops. The blue bag is there. Phone charger ready. Raincoat in place. It's going to be like you never left. So I can't wait.
Sleeping on counters.
Oh,
sleeping on buses. Sleeping on planes.
Listen, I speaking of count, I may have ordered a second beer that was not necessary that night in Sendai, so there was definitely a little bit of snoozing going on there. But look, it's to be expected. As we again, very professional, as we circle back to the beginning of this episode, both of us are getting near to 50, so a nap now and then is to be expected, if not recommended.
I mean, it's generally taken at home on a sofa or bed, but anyway, look, you know what, it gives me a bit of peace because I can go and get some photographs taken. The only problem is, quite often, as we've documented many times, I've then got to also entertain the owner as I'm photographing, and also often in, as you said earlier about Tohoku, a regional dialect that you think you can speak Japanese until you suddenly come across one of these dialects and you're like, oh, I can't speak a word of this language, what are you saying? So anyway, look, I can't wait. I just can't believe that finally the tickets are booked, and like my fingers and everything else is crossed that nothing else will go wrong in the meantime. And we may or may not have another episode before that. Probably, I think we hopefully will, but Well,
I was not to spring it on you, but I was planning to bring my portable mic, and we'll do a in-person podcast for the first time, which would be wow. Entertaining. I'll buy 2 cans of Imperial Stout then, so we can each get a little bit loopy.
Well, either way, when we come back, or when I come back rather, there's going to be plenty of content as well for additional podcasts, as well as a whole new raft of new places to talk about, a whole new raft of photos as well. So it's really, really exciting. But look, in the meantime, James, as always, it's been mostly a pleasure to talk with you. We'll see you for the next one's going to be episode 50. So I feel like maybe we need to do something a little bit special for that, or maybe not. Maybe we don't want to.
Got a couple ideas, Bruin. We'll kick it offline. Don't forget the PR, of course. Everybody's favorite part of the podcast. Just this morning, episode number 155 of OK Jazz went online. Philip, you got a shout out at the end, so make sure you listen to all the way to the.
That'll be a reason to listen for once.
No, you do every time anyway. Yes, follow me on social media. You can see all of the pictures from these various Kissaten, including a few places we didn't talk about today, but some more places in Tohoku, including if you're a Japanese jazz fan. Philip, I don't know if I told you that. I went to the Akiyoshi Toshiko Museum in Morioka City.
You did not?
Okay, well, they call it a museum. I was told it was a museum. That's really stretching it. It's an exhibit in a very odd location on the second floor of a bus station. a lot of inexplicable things about that. Maybe we can get into on another show. That
Love it.
comes
Love
into
it.
the gossip I heard. But in any case, it was really interesting because, I think a lot of our listeners will know that, Akiyoshi-san is a trailblazer for so many reasons, not just for being one of the first women to go to the Berklee College of Music back in the late 50s, but I mean, clearly the first Japanese person to attend that college. And the amount of nonsense that she faced as a woman, as an Asian woman, trying to get gigs and to prove herself and to establish her career. And she's still out there performing today at age 92. Really incredible. And so, yeah, the exhibit is really nice. I mean, it's basically just a lot of memorabilia, old magazines and pictures, but there's a really informative timeline as well. So I learned a lot of things I didn't know. So that was certainly a highlight of the trip. So if you're a jazz fan and you're here in Japan, I would recommend it. Morioka City as well. Very, very pleasant to walk around. So that is, So you could see a couple pictures of that as well up on my Instagram. So there we are. PR.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know. I think we could cut that PR of yours down a bit. But anyway, look, I'll get once Brian's had a go at the sound, I'll get the editing scissors out and we'll try and condense that slightly. Listen, TokyoJazzJoints.com, if you're not aware of it already, and how could you not be if you've listened to the podcast, but at TokyoJazzJoints.com, especially on Instagram, is probably where we're most active. Also at Tokyo Jazz Joints on Twitter as well. But look, in the meantime, thank you for all your ongoing support. Thank you to all of you who pledged and supported the project in whatever way you did. Thank you, James, to you for another riveting chat. And I'll see you on the next one, number 50.
You betcha, buddy. Can't wait. The countdown has started. Just 6 weeks to go. See you soon.
See ya.